Hi, Dr. Eric Westman here, and it's my great pleasure to have Dr. Vera Tarman with me today. We're going to be talking about sugar addiction, food addiction. Is it real? What is it? What can you do about it? Hi, Vera. How are you doing?
Hi, Eric. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I need to just go over your bio in front of you. I know that's always a little bit nerve-wracking, but Dr. Tarman is the medical director of one of Canada's largest treatment centers for substance abuse. She's internationally renowned for her work on food addiction and sugar addiction, and author of the book, Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction, as well as co-host of the popular podcast, Food Junkies. Dr. Tarman is highly respected in her field and has given talks at international meetings, but has also lived the food addiction life herself as a recovering food addict. I understand that you've lost and maintained over 100-pound weight loss. Is that right?
That's right.
That's
Yes.
fantastic. So the academic side, the real world living street credibility side, my pleasure to have you here. And I've learned so much from you over the last few years. I want to just thank you before we get into this, and because there was a niche or an element that I didn't quite understand as a keto doctor, a medical doctor, although my history in tobacco cessation kind of primed me for this, and you helped me kind of blend these two worlds that I thought were not together, but they really are for so many people. So thank you. And I suppose people are wondering, what is food addiction? How do you define it? Is it really a thing?
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to answer that question, but if I can, first of all, just thank you back to you, because I was really delighted when you were interested in the subject of food addiction, a few years ago when we initially had contact, because I discovered that the keto movement was using a food addiction friendly plan. And I was trying my best to get people to accept a food addiction plan with so much resistance. And then I just stumbled upon you and a community of people who are doing it happily. And it was like, what? How are you able to get people to do something that I could not do? And anyway, so it's a happy marriage as far as I'm concerned. So the definition of food addiction is actually even controversial within the community itself. We're struggling, should we call it sugar addiction? Because certainly sugar addiction is, almost everybody agrees, yes, sugar is addictive. I mean, the research there's more and more research showing that that's the case. It's kind of hard to argue that. I mean, yes, you'll find people who do to argue that, but there is more and more mounting research. But should we expand and just call it food addiction? Now it's a favorite. I'm going to define what these terms actually mean, but I just want to say, first of all, that we haven't landed on a term that we're happy with at this point. And probably the one that we're the most likely to settle on is processed food addiction, because I think most of us recognize that sugar addiction, yes, there is addiction to sugar. As I said, all the research that's mounting. But now there's more and more murmurings about processed food addiction. So it's not just sugar, it's also flour. It's basically processed foods, processed oils, it's processed foods, not just sugar. And it's not necessarily only the ingredient of sugar, but in the actual mechanics of food being processed, that something's happening there. So that will incorporate a larger umbrella. Personally, I still like the term food addiction because it makes for an even larger umbrella, which might include then foods that are not processed, like dairy, like nuts. I mean, dairy is somewhat processed, but it's not, in the same way as flour and cakes and candies and whatnot. Anyway, it opens up to the concept that there are trigger foods that can even be healthy, and also food behaviors like restricting or overeating, volume addiction. So it opens up the umbrella much larger, but likely we will settle on the concept of processed food addiction. So I had to say that because we're not even decided on what we should say, but let's, for the purposes of our talk today, use my definition, which is food addiction, because it opens up so many more possibilities.
So what would the practical reality of that definition be for someone watching? How do you know if you are a food addict?
Well, okay, so let me give the definition. One thing I want to say is that uh, before we get to how do you know, why is it that people don't even think about it? Why,
Okay.
is it even an entity? And it's it's not in the DSM-5. It's not in the clinical mindset of most physicians, especially obesity physicians, which you would think it would be, but it's not. It's not in the mindset of general practitioners, people who are dealing with even the eating disorder community. It's not in the mindset of that. And part of that is because it has not yet been acknowledged sort of on the clinical level. It's definitely been acknowledged in the popular internet lived experience. People are talking about it amongst themselves, but clinically it's not really being acknowledged. So we have to borrow, because we're calling it, you and I are using this word addiction, so we have to borrow from the addiction community and the addiction literature, because we can't use the food literature, we can't use the obesity literature. They're not talking this conversation. And so when I want to define what sugar or food or processed food addiction is, it's whatever that thing we're talking about is that we're addicted to. What are the behaviors? This is going to answer your question. This is a long answer to your question.
How do I know if I'm a food addict? Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So what are the behaviors that we expect? Now, this would be for any addiction, including cigarettes. You mentioned cigarettes, and that's probably why you and I are diving together on this topic, because I actually think food addiction is very similar to tobacco addiction, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But so we're looking for specific addictive behaviors. And let me give you the medical terminology, first of all, and then we'll look at the actual specifics of somebody listening going, well, is that me? So the medical large definition would be of addiction is just any neuropsychological, social, behavioral disorder that is characterized by compulsive, maladaptive behaviors, we'll talk about those in a minute, that a patient is unable to control or stop despite harmful consequences. So there's three elements to that. The compulsive, maladaptive behavior. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, but I'm gonna have to have you say it in different language.
Yes, I'm going to. So, but I just to boil that down: compulsive, maladaptive behavior, unable to stop despite negative consequences. So, what does compulsive maladaptive behavior mean? It means that you're behaving around food in a way that is compulsive and maladaptive. It's a problem. So, for example, do I eat more than I intend to? And these are the questions that I'm going to give you a bunch of questions now, and you can go on the internet and just type in what are the 20 questions for any addiction, including food addiction, and you'll find this. Do you eat more than you anticipate? I plan to eat only a little bit. I'm going to have just a couple of bars or chips, or I don't know what, but you end up eating the whole thing, and then somebody else's as well. Like it's far more than you meant to. Do you eat in a way that you don't want other people to know? Like, in other words, you'll eat privately or you'll lie. You'll say, you know what, I eat really well, but you don't tell people about what happens when you get home at night and you're alone.
Or late at night, in the middle of the night.
Exactly. And even to the point of when you're sleeping. So we got this concept of night eating. And when people are night eating, they're not eating, their celery sticks and their steak bits, bacon bits. No, they're eating stuff that, right. They see the wrappers on the floor. So even to themselves, they're not admitting it. So it might come to the point where they're lying about their eating. So maladaptive behaviors. So you're lying about it. You're eating foods that you don't want to be eating. You've been told by your doctor you're diabetic. You have to stop eating whatever refined food you're eating. And you may even realize, yes, I have a problem. Here are the this is the maladaptiveness, the negative consequences. But you can't stop. So often what happens is when people try to stop, it then becomes like this game of deprivation. I'm going to have this, now I'm going to stop. So anybody recognizes this behavior. You have a lot, then you decide I better stop, and then you find that you're eating more. And then you find that you're obsessing about it to the point where that's that is the mental landscape, is you're thinking about that food, or you're thinking about the consequences, the negative consequences. I'm going to gain weight. And that becomes the mental chatter in your mind all the time. So are you thinking about food all the time? Are you craving particular foods that you wish you didn't? Are you trying to stop? Are you lying about your food? Embarrassed about it, feel shame? These are all the behaviors that are associated with any addiction. Alcohol fits perfectly with this as well, but food does for sure. Usually you don't worry about it until you have negative consequences, because there's negative consequences. So those are the 20 questions. Or there's more. Do you, like I said, do you lie about it? Do you eat in secret? Do you eat foods that you threw away because you said, oh my God, I got to get rid of this, and then sneak up later and eat that food again? Are you willing to drive across the city to get that favorite treat that you want because the local store doesn't have it? Like, are you willing to go to the lengths that you would not do for a celery stick? Like, it's just behaviors that are out of the norm around food.
Well, and so one other issue that just really hits our hearts as practitioners trying to help people.
Yes.
Why do people blame themselves for this process? Because I joke in my clinic that I won't let you beat yourself up in here. I'm here to support you, and it's not your fault, and yet everyone comes in thinking it's their fault, even if it's cigarettes, even if it's Snickers bars or ice cream. Why? What part of addiction is it that in our brain that blame ourselves?
If I can make another analogy, this is like a person who has Tourette's. If that Tourette's being this sort of person has twitches, or they bark, or they make funny sounds, or something like that. And if you say to them, hey, can you stop that because it's kind of noisy or it's bothersome? They could actually stop. They could stop. They could hold still and not twitch, but they can't stop the urge. There's a mental thing that's going on that is building and building and building. And then to the moment that you turn away, they're going to start twitching because they need to get it out of them. So people will say, I should just stop, Vera, stop this eating, behave myself. Well, yes, I can, because I can voluntarily pick this thing up and drink or eat and not, but I can't stop the desire. Once that's in my mind, it's triggering something in my brain, which is the whole concept of addiction. That's what we're talking about today. That thing is beyond my control. It's in a part of my brain, just like the Tourette's person, that you can control the voluntariness of it, but it's very short-lived. And that urge, that craving will trump, it will overpower, because it's in a part of the brain that overpowers voluntary choice. And when people say you should just stop, it's with moralistic statement, because they can stop, but they don't have that urge and that need to basically that urge that's as powerful as the person who's suffering. So really, I mean, what you're trying to suggest to that person is, you have to have compassion. People don't like to use the word disease. You have a disorder. You have something going on in the brain that has been miswired, and that's not your fault. It's, if anybody's fault, it's the food industry, which has tapped into that and has extenuated that, exaggerated that.
So a colleague of mine recently, a medical colleague, even said, there's no food addiction. You have to eat.
Yeah.
You can't be addicted to food. And I'm like, no, you don't have to eat garbage.
No, you don't have to eat garbage. Exactly. That's like saying you have to breathe if you're trying to get the person to quit smoking. Well, you have to breathe.
Yeah, you don't have to put cancer sticks in your mouth as you breathe. And yet that just kind of defies logic. And a lot of doctors come at this, just put down the food, step back from the table, and they don't get it. So we're in a medical world that doesn't understand. In fact, the obesity medicine world, funny you should say, most obesity medicine doctors don't understand this. I went to my most recent medicine, it's called the OMA, Obesity Medicine Association. One of my colleagues came up to me, I've known him for years. He said, Eric, Dr. Westman, Eric, that's the first time you ever said addiction, food addiction. And I didn't realize, so much time had passed.
Yes.
I feel like I've talked about this forever now, but yeah, there was probably a time when I didn't really understand the degree to which food is so similar. I mean, but you've dealt with other addictions. You might explain your background.
Yes.
How is food addiction similar or different than these
Yeah.
other, what people perceive as hardcore addictions?
Yeah, so I mean that is a really it's a real eye-opening experience for me working in the field of addiction. So I'm just going to give you a great example. I work in a treatment center, a resident, so I get to see people come in for a month, and they're living there, and they will come in and they're coming off of drugs like crystal meth or alcohol, like serious alcohol, like seizures if they stop. Or cocaine, and actually we're seeing more and more people with cannabis as well, believe it or not, but because it's becoming so prevalent now. But some of these drugs are pretty serious drugs. I think about crystal meth as being probably one of the most potent drugs that will bring a person down so that they lose their functionality within 2 or 3 years, and fentanyl addiction as well, which is opiate addiction. But fentanyl fentanyl and crystal meth are like the most potent of their category of drugs. They're most potent. So people, the guys are coming in, or the women are coming in, they're detoxing off of that drug, and then what inevitably happens is they say, I can't understand why I am eating so much. Now, if you're coming off of a stimulant, yes, definitely you want to eat a lot because you haven't been eating, and there's that urge to eat for the first 2 or 3 days. But we're talking 3rd week, 4th week, and they're eating not good food that, well, I'm not going to say that the treatment centers give necessarily good food, but they're not giving candy bars and whatnot. But they do have a machine, a vending machine in their center that people are constantly going and getting soda pop and chips and whatnot. And they say, I don't know why I'm eating all this. And then often what I've seen is over the months, when I sometimes see them in follow-up, their belly is getting bigger and bigger. They're gaining weight. Initially, they were happy because they thought, wow, I'm gaining weight. That's good. But then they realize it's all packing around their center, which of course we know is visceral obesity and not good. And they're starting to realize, well, I better stop eating this way. And they can't. And the telling thing for me is, over and over and over again, I hear people saying, this is harder to quit than the alcohol. And when I heard people saying, this is harder to quit than crystal meth, I mean, that just floored me the first time I heard that.
It's harder to quit sugar and
yes.
food than crystal meth.
Yes,
Wow.
harder to quit sugar than crystal meth. And you think, why would that be? So crystal meth, the drug of crystal meth is so powerful that you may be, the guy is begging on the street, can you give me some money? And you know that they haven't eaten. So you might decide, okay, let's hope they're not going to use it for drugs. They're going to use it for food. They need that, but they will still go and use it for the drug, despite the fact that they need that little extra 10 or 20 bucks, whatever you gave them. So when you've got something that potent, and then the person says sugar was harder, why do we not see that?
So some things that strike me is that it's legal and it's easy to get.
Exactly.
How can it be bad?
Exactly. And we call it food. When it's not food, it's a food product. It's not a food. Otherwise, the person wouldn't be addicted to it with the potency, with the crystal meth potency. But the only way we can get a whiff of it, that it is that potent, besides when a person is actually trying to stop, is if you say to the person, you know what, just for tonight, I don't want you to have your special treat that you have before you go to sleep, or after your meal. You're just going to have you probably came up with this, Eric. Don't you have this when you're presenting your 20-gram keto plan? When you present there you are, they're coming to you and you're saying, I've got a solution. Here's a diet plan and I want you to follow it. Isn't the first reaction, you're kidding? You want me to stop eating all these carbs?
Oh, people cry.
Exactly.
When faced with that.
Yes, that's it. And the level of crying is probably the level of addiction. So that's where you get a whiff of the problem, is when you ask the person to stop, even for that meal or that day.
Well, of course, I pitch it, I frame it in here are all the great things that will happen. And of course you can have ribeye steak and all these other things, which I guess is kind of like giving a methadone or Suboxone or some to me, sugar-free Jell-O is like a crutch to get you off sugar.
Yes.
But the total cessation of the drug is like what I teach. The keto diet is a total, pretty much cessation of all of the sugar and starch, the addictive element. And so that's
Yes.
kind of similar to other treatments for addiction.
Yes, yes. And you have to go through a withdrawal. And so once we start talking the language of addiction, we start to recognize what we see clinically. The person, like you said, cries, or they have some reaction. And then, you give them some hope, but they're going to come back. And I don't know, I'm sure you've had the experience where people are relapsing. They come back and go, I tried, I tried and I lost weight, but I'm eating it again. I don't know how to stop.
I had cravings.
Yes, yes.
So, so the hallmark of withdrawal syndrome, right, is that you do have cravings for the substance that you stopped.
Absolutely. And when people say, I hear this all the time too, I can't, doctors don't want to ask somebody to stop because they'll say they'll just feel deprived and then they'll binge and use more, which is true. That will happen. So what you have to do is help the person through that period of time, because what they're going through is withdrawal. The deprivation that the person feels that night or the next few days is part of the withdrawal. It's an enhanced need to feel normal again, because you're not taking your drug. And when the alcoholic doesn't take their drug, they get shaky and sweaty and agitated. When the person who's quitting smoking doesn't get their drug, all they can think about is that cigarette, and they're getting antsy. Like, they're feeling deprived, yes, but because we normalize food, we say we shouldn't do that to people. What we got to do instead is say, this is post-acute withdrawal. It lasts about, I don't know, 3 days if you're lucky, 4 days,
Yeah,
up to sometimes up to 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on the person, how long they've been doing it, how much it depends on the person. I would say anywhere, if you're lucky, like you said, 3 to 4 days to 3 weeks. It's over. It's over then. It's not like this is going to be life. You got to get through this actual withdrawal process, and then you're on the other side.
Treatment of withdrawal. What am I doing when I tell someone just make up a big bowl of sugar-free Jello, put it in the fridge, let it set, and you can have one or two or you can have as much of that as you want.
Yes.
Because there's no carbs in it. You don't get the sugar and insulin rise, and yet it's giving that sweet taste that mimics the sugar.
Yes.
So what is that called in the addiction medicine?
Well, I guess it's called a harm reduction. It is, like you said earlier, it's like a methadone or a Suboxone to help the person get off the opiate. And in that early stage, if that keeps the person in the game, I would say do it.
I even had someone who came back and said, the first few days, you said I could have as much bacon, I had 3 pounds of bacon every day, and I was like, good Lord, what have I done? But after a few days, the thrill wore off and I got over it. So in those first few days, I've heard the darndest stories about using the tools that aren't sugar, but it's getting people away from the sugar, even to the point of avoidance, right?
Yes.
If you would always purchase whatever at the ball game that was carb, don't go to the ball game for a few weeks, right?
Exactly. That's actually one of the tools, is don't go to the ball game. People, I'm going to use myself as an example. I used to go to movies all the time. I love movies. And then I realized that actually what I really loved was the big, and I'm talking big thing of popcorn that I used to have. I'd have mine and I'd have my partner's, because she wasn't going to eat it all. And when I stopped doing that stuff, suddenly my interest in movies was not that strong. Or when I went to a movie, all I could think about was the popcorn that I couldn't have. So I stopped going for 2 or 3 years. Now I can go. So you have to apply some tools and recognize it's like having respect for this thing that's happened. And then this thing, meaning this addiction that's within, and you will work your way through it, but you have to treat it with respect and compassion and whatnot. So if using a big bowl of Jello does it for the first few days or even the first month, do it, because it'll get you over. And then you obviously don't want to be eating that kind of sweetener, because that's going to trigger the desire for sweet. We want to actually get beyond the desire for sweet, so that just having the sweet of a vegetable is enough. Just having the pleasure of food without enhanced sweet will be enough. It will be eventually.
having grown up as a Halloween candy
Oh,
barter or for my favorite candy, I will still have sweet things, but they in no way have sugar. So I've kind of come to that peace myself by
yes.
allowing for these other sweeteners. I know a lot of zealots say don't have them, but I stay within the realm of
Yes.
sugar-free
Yeah.
sweets. So
Well, actually, what you're doing, and I think this is really important, is when you go into early stage food addiction treatment, often there's some pretty rigid rules about what to do, and that might be appropriate for the first month or so. But it's actually really a good idea to work with the person. This is why we say you should have a coach or a sponsor or somebody that you're working with to tailor it to you. So what eventually will happen is that, so you, Eric, say, okay, I want to have a little bit of sweet once in a while, and I know that if I contain it, I can manage this. Somebody else may not be able to manage it, or maybe you can manage the Jello, but there's no way you could manage a particular keto treat. I mean, I look at some of those and go, oh my God, there's no way I could just have one of those. But other ones I could have one of.
you mean
So
the keto junk foods that are out there now?
yes,
That you have
yes.
one and then you want to have all six
Exactly,
done it
exactly.
and
I mean,
there.
remember when Atkins had his forget what those little bars were.
They're still around.
They're still,
Yeah.
I would eat the whole thing. I would eat
Yeah.
tons of those. Yeah. So I
Well, we
mean,
laugh
yes,
so that we don't cry, right?
exactly.
I mean, it gets to my next question. How common is this?
Oh, okay. Well, that's another good question. Because we don't have a definition that's clinically accepted, we don't yet have a lot of research, because we have some research, and I'm going to tell you what the statistics are there, but we don't have enough. We need to have more people talking about it. So what Ashley Gearhart is probably the person that's done the most research on prevalence, because she's actually the one that came up with the sort of medical tool. It's called the Yale Food Inventory that will actually diagnose food addiction. She came up with that scale and has been using that scale across various populations to figure out what the prevalence is. So how prevalent is food addiction in USA in various populations? And the latest information is it's somewhere around 11 to 14%, which, to give context, is about the same amount as alcoholism. That how many alcoholics do we have in society, in American society and Canadian society? About 10, 11, 12%. Food addiction, maybe a little bit more, according to her scale. And then if you look at specific populations, it can be like the obese population, or people who have had bariatric surgery, or people who have had mental issues. Then we're looking at higher numbers like 20 to 30%. And if you're looking at particularly obese populations, this is not her work anymore, this is just other people using the scale, we have numbers anywhere between 30 and 50%, which means, therefore, that somebody who's overweight, who's listening, it's probably 50% chance that they are a food addict. But in the general population, I think the number we're going to land on is around 13 to 14%.
That's interesting. That's also the current prevalence of cigarette smoking
Oh,
in the
really? Of
US.
now? Yeah.
20 years ago, when I was in the tobacco cessation world, the prevalence was 30%,
Oh, well,
35.
yeah. So
So that's come down
yeah.
over time, but it's taken, decades.
Yes.
I wonder if that's going to happen with sugar over the next 20
Yeah. Well,
years.
I'm a little cynical, and I wonder if, in fact, that those smokers are now your smokers are now my eaters.
Well,
They've
sorry,
transferred their
sorry
addiction.
about that.
Yeah.
Is there some way to predict who's going to become a food addict, or let's say you have a child who's behaving a
Yes.
certain way, or how do you look at that prediction?
Okay. So there are some predispositions. So there is genetic predisposition. Therefore, if you look in your family, are there other people who are obese? Now, obesity is not just for food addiction. Absolutely not. Like I said, 40 to 50%. And there's all sorts of other reasons. So the person might not be a food addict, but if they're eating processed foods, they're eating high carb foods, they're gaining weight, most likely that's the case. Now, if we're looking previous, like family history, let's be aware that obesity is a phenomena of this generation. I guess it's like what, since the 1970s, 80s, we've seen a really sharp rise. And that's a sharp rise to the food industry. So if somebody was before that, chances are they might have had an issue with food. I don't know. So if there's obesity in the family, there you have a predisposition. And certainly if you are obese, you are definitely going to predispose your next generation, your children, to obesity. And if you're eating particular foods, processed foods, even while you're pregnant, and Dr. Nicole Avina talks about this at great length, you are predisposing your child to becoming a food addict, having a preference for those foods, which is, basically setting the groundwork for food addiction. So genetics. And if you look in your family and there's a history of alcoholism, that is a predisposition for food addiction. Basically, it's when we've studied alcoholism, we've studied what's called the dopamine 2 receptor abnormalities. And those dopamine 2 receptor abnormalities in alcohol are also evident in food addicts. So it would then make sense that other addictions like cocaine, I don't know about tobacco, but cocaine or opiates, they also may have a dopamine 2 receptor abnormality. So there's basically genetics is one predisposition. A second one is if you live in 2023.
Yes.
You live and you eat the foods of today, you are, I think it's a question of, we're saying 14%, it's a question of, it's eventually going to happen if you continue to eat the foods that we are, that the food industry is giving us without caution. It's the same as if you live in a society where people are drinking all the time, kids are drinking all the time, they're going to become alcoholics. Like it's just a level of exposure, frequency of exposure and amount of it, that it's inevitable, because addiction is really just a natural response to an abnormal environment. And the genetics is just that some people respond more quickly than another person. So that's, we've got genetics, we've got prevalence. I mean, just let me think what else. And then we've got the social norms. Like this is the other thing that we already touched on. We call these things food, and we call the behaviors around them, like Christmas and Easter and Halloween, normal behavior, to be giving kids all this stuff. The only way I could say it is, it's like, would we give our children cigarettes and then on Halloween say, this is happy smoke day and you get to smoke as much as you want? And it's just absurd, but we have normalized it so that it's okay. Or alcohol.
Would you? And it's important to keep in mind that we're not just talking about sugar as the addictive element. I've had people come in and say, oh, I don't have a problem with sugar and sweets. It's bread. They can't stop eating bread.
Yes.
What is it about bread?
Well, okay, so then we talk about, the actual makeup of processed food, because what is bread but a grain that's been processed? Like it's when you have normal foods like normal vegetables and meats and fats, the body, it takes a fair amount of time for the body to metabolize that food, and whatever sugar is in there is processed within the context of all the other food, and it's done at a pace that the body, because of how the body responds via insulin, it's done at a pace that the body can manage. But when you wallop it with huge amounts of sugar, the body can't keep up, and you're essentially removing the body's ability to act in a responsible manner. It's basically what it is.
Well,
so bread
a neurochemical hit, right?
Yes, it's a neurochemical hit that the body then has to respond back to, because it's too much and it's damaging. And bread is not, it's a grain, but it's a grain that's been processed, and it is metabolized into sugar. Something should take at least 2 hours to break down. It's like 10 minutes and it becomes sugar. And then if you eat bread, you're getting this wallop of sugar that, instead of over the course of 2 hours, for the body can happily, deal with it. The pancreas and the liver, everything works nice in sync. But when it's these wallops of this, it can't manage that. And then the brain can't manage that as well. So essentially, it goes into, I want to say, defensive mode. And then you start to see the pattern of addiction, which is actually tolerance. But that's a whole other conversation. But
Well,
bread is highly processed. And
recently, one of my patients said, "But fruit's good for you."
yes, exactly.
Can you be addicted to fruit?
Yeah, well, you can, okay, so that's actually, fruit is maybe a better example than bread. So fruit in and of itself is not a problem if you eat it with the fiber and the whatever, and if you eat it in the way that we're not talking about fruit of today, but we're talking about fruit of maybe less sweet, like of 100 years ago. Okay, because again, the food industry has made fruit almost a drug in and of itself. So if a person is eating fruit of yesterday, and how much could they realistically eat in a day? Probably 1 or 2 pieces of fruit, maybe over the course of the day, 3. After that, they're going to feel bloated and uncomfortable, and the fiber and everything else would stop them. And so that amount of fructose that the liver is getting and the brain is getting, the hit of the sugar, is not so much that it's going to be damaging. But if you have fruit in the form of fruit juice or alcohol, because what is alcohol but fermented fruit or fermented carbohydrates, you're getting way too much. So so is fruit okay? Yes, in extreme moderation. Now, what I would like to say is that in today's society, where people have been bombarded, so their livers are now ill, their brain is now ill, in other words, addicted. Sometimes 1 or 2 pieces of fruit, the body can no longer manage. Like they become, in your terminology, insulin resistant. And so that even a 1 piece of fruit is no longer okay. It might have been okay when they were 5 or 10 years old and they weren't damaged, but now it may not be okay. That's why we have to individualize our food plans.
So in one word,
yes.
Can you be addicted to fruit? Yes, maybe, no?
Yes, sometimes.
I would say yes. I mean, not everyone,
Okay.
of course.
It depends
But
on what fruit it is too. Like cherries, yes. Bananas, yes,
wow,
because they're so
you
sweet.
name it. In our area, it becomes the
Plums,
peaches, and then
yes.
the watermelon, and then the grapes that are so sweet. And
Exactly. Yeah.
people go from one fruit to the next. Anyway, I was just trying to kind of
But
get you to acknowledge, yeah, sure, you can be addicted to fruit. Not
yes, you can be
everyone, of
addicted.
course.
You can be addicted to it. But you don't have to become. If you start early and you're not living into today's society, the thing is we wouldn't be eating the way that we are now. Well, I guess the answer is yes. Because addiction is just anytime you eat something or do something despite negative consequences, and you still do it anyway. That's the dynamic of addiction. Normally, fruits should not do that, but they do that in today.
Switching gears,
Yeah.
how do you look at treating somebody with food addiction?
Okay, so you want to acknowledge that there's a condition that exists. The person eats something and they want more of it. And they want more of it because they've developed a tolerance and this whole phenomena that we call addiction. So the most obvious thing that we do.
Tolerance is the wanting to get a result, a feeling,
Yes,
but you need more and more of it to
exactly.
get that feeling.
Yeah.
And then I remember you taught me a phrase where one
Oh yes, one is too much and 1,000 is not enough.
One is too much because it gets you started.
Yes.
And 1,000 isn't. So you keep eating and eating to try to get that same reward, and it never comes.
Exactly. It's like an itch. Once you scratch, you got a little bit of an itch, and once you scratch, it gets itchier, and then you scratch it harder, and it gets even itchier. So you shouldn't have scratched it the first time because it just got worse. That's the dynamic of addiction in a metaphor right there. So what you would want to do is you don't scratch the itch. So when you notice, oh geez, I want something sweet, Don't give into it because it's only going to make you want the sweet more often. What do we call that? Abstinence. So a person is trying to quit smoking and they think, oh, you know, I want a cigarette, but you're going to say, no, I'm not going to have one, because if I have one, I'm just going to want more, or I'm just going to continue to want more. If you've quit for a few days and then you think, you know what, I've actually not had a cigarette for a few days, I'll have a puff. Well, we all know what's going to happen. The person's going to start smoking again. Same thing with food. You have to do abstinence. You can do bridges, alternative, like harm reduction. So with smoking, it's the patch, or maybe the gum, and with smoking, pardon me, with eating, it would be something like your bowl of sugar-free Jello. So you can do that kind of stuff, but eventually you want to get off of that stuff. But most mainly abstinence. And because abstinence is so hard, then what you want to do is get support and tools. So one of the tools, like what you suggested earlier, get it out of the house. Don't have it around. Don't go to the movie. Don't go to the bar. Don't go to that wedding. Don't go to that event, because there's a lot of food or alcohol or whatever it is there. Protect yourself while you're in withdrawal by getting rid of all the triggers. This is all behaviors that you wouldn't do if you didn't think that this was an addiction. That's why I'm saying you have to acknowledge that it's an addiction. Then you remove the triggers, get support as well.
Well, let's talk about the support a bit, because
yes,
having come through a pandemic, worldwide, I find a lot of loners stayed at home.
yes,
A lot of people just lived alone, and now I have come to realize that what I've been teaching is really abstinence from a drug, and yet people couldn't do it. And then now I'm finding that I'm bringing into my daily talk about support. Who are you getting support from? Oh, no. And this was largely this merging the addiction world with the eating, food addiction world. How important is support? And I have to say, to those who are listening, if you've never tried this without support, you're really not going to have much of a chance.
No, it's so important. Part of it is because we live in a society where everywhere it's ubiquitous. It's like smoking used to be. It's ubiquitous. Everywhere you look, there's food, or there's triggers or cues or temptations. So every minute of the day, almost, unless you're locked into your own house, and then you've got your mind, and you've got TV, and you've got the internet, and you've got all sorts of reminders that there's something, this drug that you could take right now. You could take it the whole day. You could eat and binge and nibble the whole day. So we've got this onslaught. And how do we stop that? We have to buffer ourselves, protect ourselves. I can't do that myself because I am under the barrage of temptation. I need somebody to hang on to. I need to have a community of people, certainly one person. This is what we might call a coach, where you call and you say, I'm having trouble. This is what I'm going to do. Somebody regularly there to help buffer the outside world, as it were. I call it like making it a bubble, a treatment center. A person goes in for 28 days. And often people will say it's just the group themselves that carry it. They build a buffer around. So it's this, and they say, I don't want to leave the treatment center by the end because they're protected in there. Well, you need to do that in a community outside all the time, which can be virtually or in person. And COVID and the isolation was a real problem because it broke down a lot of those connections. But it didn't break down the invitation to eat all the time, because there was this big joke about stuff, that you make COVID recipes and stuff like that. How do you bear isolation?
Eat.
Eat.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
so there's hope. And I am happy to now switch gears to something that you can do if you're watching, and that's to join us at the Adapt Your Life Academy in an upcoming class. And this is a class we've given once before, and it's my great pleasure to have Dr. Tarman be the professor of the class. Tell us a little bit about the class that's coming up.
Yeah, well, okay, so the class is actually two things. There's the support piece that we were talking about, and I want to definitely mention that. The class itself is, remember when I was talking about how you want to acknowledge and understand this? So the sugar and food addiction class gives the sort of foundations, a lot of what we've talked about today, the foundations of understanding what addiction is, how food is addictive, then what are the triggers of you yourself, if you think that you are a food addict, well, actually it helps you to define if you are one, then what are the triggers, and then what are the next steps? What do I do? So it gives all that information that is not out there in the larger world. It's not out there, certainly not. I mean, I'm speaking medically, but also clinically. You'll get this voice in the public, but you won't get this from a lot of doctors. You'll get it to some degree from the keto doctors because they've got the diet. They didn't realize they had the diet, but they had the perfect diet in their hands. So I would encourage, if anybody could, to find a keto doctor as well. But anyway, you're not going to get this from a sort of clinical medical perspective, except for this course, not yet. So I would suggest that on that level, it's valuable. But then the other thing that we're offering is a support group, like a sugar-free challenge coming up soon. And the main focus of that challenge is to say, okay, if you are ready, now is the time. We're going to give you that support, the very support that we were talking about. You're going to get the information in the course, but you're going to get the support that is, I think, critical. I personally would not have been able to do it without support. And anybody I know who's been in long-term recovery, and what I mean by that is most people can lose the weight, but can they stay off it for 10, 20, 30 years? They can't unless they have some level of support. And we're going to introduce that as well.
So just to kind of reiterate, if you have any interest in learning more, go to adaptyourlifeacademy.com, click on the sugar and food addiction course, get on the waiting list, learn more about the course. You'll get the information and heads up about the sugar-free challenge, which I think is a nominal $9 or something. So I hope, you know, thousands and thousands of people will sign up for the sugar-free challenge. If that wasn't enough, then you can consider taking the larger course that actually gets the personalized support as you do what, really rephrasing it now, is kind of a cold turkey keto diet off sugar for 3 weeks, and we'll help you the best we can. We put all of our resources into the students in our classes. So the first, kind of go to Adapt Your Life Academy, get more information about the sugar and food addiction course, consider doing the sugar challenge, and then consider doing the larger course if you need it. And a percentage of folks, all you really need to know is that this is an issue and you'll be able to solve it. A percentage of you will try and not have success. It's okay, keep trying, and it will help you as best we can in these different venues. And in fact, I remember, Dr. Tarman, you had a residential program where people got off.
Yes.
Sure. What did you learn from that experience?
What I learned from that experience was, wow. You know, one of the things was whenever we talked about it as we were trying to promote it, it was so interesting how people would be like, what, really? I think I'd like to go. Like, it was like, it was really good. I mean, there were people that were in a treatment center for drugs and alcohol. And then we had the food addiction as part of that. And the people that were sitting with the food addiction, they felt exactly the same. It was the same language, the same sense of unity everybody felt. So the person that was struggling with food addiction felt as bad as the person with another drug or alcohol addiction. And when they were eating, I got to tell you that people were like, oh, they're not going to be able to eat our desserts, but they would look and they go, wow, that food actually looks really good. And they actually wish that they could eat it. So I think what I learned most of all was that it was very successful, much quicker than I thought. Like we were saying earlier, like, how long does it take? I was surprised at how many people felt really good after 7 days. Like, it wasn't like it took, you know, some drugs, it takes a lot longer. And for some people it took longer, but it was actually, once you got over the hump, people were like saying, I can't believe how much energy I have. And I don't feel deprived. I don't feel like I want that stuff anymore. Just like, how many of you guys are non-smokers? I used to be a smoker. When I see a cigarette now, I think, oh, it stinks. I don't want that stuff. Can you imagine having that reaction with food? I don't want that anymore. That's how I feel. And Eric, I bet you feel the same way too about your previous carbs that you used to eat.
I've limited my my I have a controlled sugar habit addiction. So,
Ah,
but I practice avoidance for the most part.
yeah,
And although my background is not one of massive or massive,
yes,
a lot of weight loss, I didn't have to lose 100 pounds. I got
yeah,
into this because of the actually from the weight loss side. And then thank you again for helping me merge in my mind my
uh-huh,
former life of tobacco cessation,
yes,
and then
yes,
the food. It really kind of makes sense in a way I couldn't have predicted.
yeah. Yeah, good. I'm glad. And just to make that connection that I think that of all of the addictions, I have said that, like I said, crystal meth users would say sugar is harder, but I would say that probably those are also the people that will say quitting cigarettes was harder than quitting cocaine or quitting alcohol. There is something about cigarettes because of the ubiquity of it and the frequency in the day of it and the normalcy that it was. It's very similar to the sugar. We often say sugar is today's tobacco, and it is on so many different levels. So if somebody did quit smoking and they wonder if they finally could, that's about what the battle of sugar addiction will be like, but you will get on the other side and you'll be fine. Like, there is hope.
The average number of quit attempts for tobacco is 7.
Oh, is it 7? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
7. Fortunately, I think you can quit sugar with attempts with help
Yes.
in fewer than 7 on average. But you want to keep,
Most of the people have multiple attempts, but they
yeah,
didn't have the information and they didn't have the support.
yeah.
So we could probably cut it down from the 7 to maybe even 1 or 2.
And then just as a last note, please don't blame yourself. If you're
Yes.
in this addictive hurricane, there's help, and we want to help you get over this if you need our help. Dr. Tarman, thank you so much. And you're talking to me from
Toronto, Canada.
Toronto, Canada. And I really hope we can help spread this information to inform people and so they can make positive changes in their health. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Always happy to talk about this.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.